Okay, hello everyone. Today is August 23rd, 2021. This is a meeting of the SIG Network API subgroup SIG Network Policy API subgroup meet to SIG Network. Remember, this is a CNCF certified foundation meeting, so please be nice to each other. Let's have a productive meeting today. So I added a couple things on the agenda. Mainly being there isn't really any new issues. There's one open issue regarding deny action that Abhishek had already commented on. We're waiting on feedback from them. Can't really do much there. I would say I can share my screen, maybe if it'll work. Cool. So this issue is just kind of holding pattern, but it is interesting. Could be some good feedback for CMP. Haven't gotten any response yet. No other issues. There's actually been a low number of issues coming to SIG Network, which is good, I guess. The next action item I wanted to talk about is kind of discuss a few things about attendance at these meetings and like maybe getting more people involved. I had some quick ideas, at least maybe move to bi-weekly meetings. Is there some other way to inform the broader community that there is work to be done here? And then the other thing is just kind of the three major work items I see as of now, which is CMP, NetPol v2, and more, investigation / conclusion to the network policy status field. So there's work to do, but we've, I think, steadily been on the downwards trend of attendance here, and love to hear some ideas on like what we can do to, get people excited.
So I think one of the problems is that this group only talks about specifications. There is no code connected to, open source code connected to what we're doing really.
That's a good point. Like fun demos tend to draw people. And I think Ricardo and Jay were really good about poking into, diving into little code.
Yeah. So I think that from the beginning, me and Jay, we've got a proposal actually to move things faster. And Jay was actually really excited about making those things based on a controller doing stuff, right? But we've got some good feedbacks about doing that and don't doing that. So we've got folks from Google actually also creating that FQDN policy, which I don't know if it moved it forward or not. But then I guess we've started to have some loss of traction as we started to dig into some stuff more complicated, right? If you take a look into like the only thing that we actually delivered that's already in Kubernetes code is the port range and the namespace selector, which took almost 1 year to get into the code. And we still don't know if the port range is gonna reach GA or not, for example. So from that perspective, I think that this pushes people back a bit because they as per say like I think that people want to contribute and put their own code into Kubernetes and help develop, and they get a bit frustrated because we keep discussing a lot like what can be made, how can we make, what are the specifications, and we don't end like doing the fun part, right?
I think
Which
there's
is
connection to it, right? I mean,
yeah.
I spoke to both you and Andrew, right? So there are two parts, right? The time it takes to develop new network policies and see them working, sort of that. Yes, work on the specs, but there's nothing there to take them and execute them, right? So I said I haven't told everyone, but we will at Calume, we will start up a project to sort of try to. Please don't put that in the writing. If people listen, that's fine. But we will start up a project with the idea of sort of filling in the void as we see it was in network policies. And one part of the problem is that, as I said, that the CNI should not consume policies. They should consume something that is a derivative of policies, call it the logical firewall rules or something like that. So I think that to get network policy where it needs to be done, we need to see it as a 2-year sort of thing. Start pushing things in, change where things are done, and sort of, just like in other areas, have the important code that makes the important decisions and sort of is the control of it as part of Kubernetes proper, and not spread around in different CNIs. And the CNIs should do sort of just like that we see we can do with Kaping now, right? They can render a specific flavor of what's already decided and not sort of own the whole mechanism. I think that is part of what needs to be done.
Yeah. I think that this is somehow the point, right? Kaping got some traction because like we already have actually the data model, which is the service. And
Yep.
the service API, it didn't change it.
Yep.
And people could like implement whatever they want. So I can, for example, implement Kaping for FreeBSD
Exactly.
because I know how to deal with packet
it
filter.
brings things forward, right? The
for
problem we had
example.
there was that we have too many forks of the kubeproxy and
Yeah.
slowly diverging semantics of what it means to do something. Kaping brings it together, so at least you have a working control plane, so you get the control plane user plane split. And then sort of for network policies, there is nothing. So I do think that needs to be filled. We will make a proposal. I'm sort of hiring people to do it, and we will do it completely open source and sort of try to.
I will do, for example, I think that Jay's approach on the beginning, maybe we should make that as an attempt, right? So this can still be an official sub project or not, but we should probably do something like, hey, this is how this group actually has drawn how we imagine cluster API they are gonna be, and we are gonna develop over these, and you may use like our CRDs and our and anybody can use their own data plane, for example, right?
Yeah, and I
So
also think that, I mean, when we look at what we see happening, right, Kaping sort of takes out, it decreases the pressure towards the API server, and does a lot of, call it, the distributed application and distributing data internally. I mean, what goes to which node and so on. It handles internally, so we don't have everyone, I mean, all the nodes reading like crazy to keep track of where the endpoint objects are and so on. And I think it's the same thing that needs to happen here, right? That the CRDs and using the API server for, I would say, internal function management just doesn't work. We'll kill the API server. We cannot use the CRDs to keep a something. What's the word I'm looking for? I mean, you cannot use the CRDs to synchronize different parts of your system. That can be used to synchronize different systems, but not the internals. That needs to be some other mechanism. And that is another thing. So
yeah,
but don't you in this case, Per, don't you agree that if we decide right now to say, hey, okay, we've got what we could get done in this last year with these two things inside the code, and now we think that we should attack like cluster network policy, but we are gonna do our way, and our way is gonna be like it's gonna be like, yeah, we are gonna implement the CRD the way that these folks from VMware, Google, and etc. discuss it, and you are going to implement like a controller that's going to create network policies, for example.
So I think it's important that we get to that we have a system where it should be easy. I call sort of that we can add in new sort of policy types. They should be very easy to describe, because in reality they describe, call it, relations between objects or set of labeled groups, right? So those should be easy to add in. And then we have another part, I call it algorithm, and the sort of that you update. I mean, we have a perfect example is the flow chart that shows the interaction between the CRDs and the network policies, right? That you should be able to describe or write code for that then can work over the different policies, because the policy types interact between each other. So we need a framework, where someone can come and say, oh, I want to do a new policy and test out, define the policy, and then be able to paint the graph, right? And then also put in an algorithm that generates rules based from this. And these rules goes into a logical firewall, and it's the firewall that the CNI implements. And sort of we're working on this sort of to describe it, and so we'll come out with sort of presented wider, I would say, within a month and a half, 2 months, and
Yeah.
start working on that. And
I mean, I think that sounds interesting too. I mean, more immediately, like I agree with Ricardo in the sense that, like, I'm not going to speak for Avishek, but we've been going back. I mean, we've been discussing CMP now like constantly
we
for
need to lock it down, right?
like weeks, and like that is not fun. Like I want to write code. Like,
But at the same time, we need to have a framework when we want to do network policy 2 that fits into it. We need to be able to make it easy and fun sort of to describe policy types, and then
I think
generate
that actually,
out the result of them without having to talk to every CNI provider and get them to do it. We need to get that framework in place. I don't, from one perspective, we'll do our stuff, we'll use it, but if someone comes with something better and put in there, I don't want to own that code. I just want it to be there. And I want to implement then the plugin to the firewall where I can drive the rules into the networking we do. And,
well, what if we just started with implementing like a quick iteration in KPMG? Like talk to
no,
Jay
I don't
about
think-
it.
I don't
Like
think
just for now, because I mean, in the next like year, we're
Yeah,
probably
so,
not-
the thing is this: if you look at what Capin cares about, right? Capin cares about service to endpoint, and network policy cares about the opposite. So when you do sort of this, you need to do it with sort of go from address and up in the data plane to something that we call them nodes that the sort of these rules works on. So you get the sort of the opposite of his data structures. But I think it needs to be following the model that Caping is doing, that you have the same sort of breakdown. So perhaps we can take the communication mechanism that's used in there and so on.
So I just want to understand a little, the conversation here, the comparison with Kipping. Basically, what we have with Kipping is that we have an API at the top layer, which is the service APIs, and then we have a controller which sits in Kubernetes, which converts these services APIs and creates endpoints for these services. And then the idea with, I have not followed Kipping, so, but my understanding is the idea is that we have providers for these implementations so that it can be implemented via IP tables or some other.
Exactly. So you have a shared control plane that also scales really well. It handles distribution, and then you can plug in data planes. So if you want to do a specific type of data planes based on whatever you want, you can plug in a model that generates the rules into that in any way you want. If you don't want to use DNAT and SNAT, you want to use on tunnel and so on, you put it in there. So it's.
So here's the difference between what their model is and what we have so far. We have the network policy API, but we don't have the cluster network policy API. So that's one thing that we need to design regardless of how it's implemented. So that's different. Services, it's already there. There's nothing new to design there. So that's why it's going to take time for us to all agree upon what the API should look like. That's one. Then we have that controller layer, which is missing. Today, the controller and the provider is like meshed into a single component, which is provided by the CNIs. And that makes sense because the networking in the end is actually provided by the CNIs, and they do it in different ways. So that's why if you want to allow, or if there are certain rules which is allowing certain traffic, you need to create rules above them to firewall them.
Well, you need to create, what you have is rules about set of objects, right?
So the proposal here is, so there is one thing that we can do is that perhaps we can introduce a controller in between, which sits in Kubernetes, and its job is only to do his job is only to calculate the pods which are affected because of this policy.
I think
But how you realize, how do you create a rule for these set of pods to these set of pods, and what kind of action that is delegated to the CNI? Is that
no, well, I really
Is
have
that a
to.
model?
So it's too bad. It's the only day I have a meeting I cannot escape from. But
okay?
I think we should work on it and so start looking at it and pushing. And
Yeah.
I should be able to
Yeah,
come back.
my point was that the API discussion is regardless of how we implement this,
Yeah.
and that is different from cupping because we already have an API there, and this is going to take time.
Yeah,
But
no,
but your point is that maybe it makes sense. Like if we have a different API for network policy, let's say like V2 or something like that, and we have a common thing that calculates all the policies, and then the CNI is just responsible for applying those policies. This makes sense. to you?
exactly. But actually, I think there needs to be something in between. That's basically, I don't think the CNI should care about network policies. They should care about firewall rules. And we need to calculate from the network policies down to these firewall rules. And that makes it possible to then use any sort of new network policy definition we want to have. We can add new policies and new algorithm that generates to this firewalling API. That way you separate what the policy is from the implementation of it.
Yeah, you kind of like describe the Antria model. So we have like a controller, which is a centralized of doing this computation. And then you have agents which are actually realizing the firewall rules. So basically it's about like open sourcing or putting that in Kubernetes as a network policy
stuff in
control.
Kubernetes and have control.
Yeah.
But I have to drop. Take care, guys. See you next week.
No worries. Yeah,
Sounds
take care.
good.
See ya.
Super.
Yeah, I think
So,
my
ahead,
main
Ricky.
thing was like, how can we, to make it a little more exciting, fast moving, maybe parallelize, the API discussion with like an actual implementation or like a sandbox implementation. I don't know if that would help. So my angle with Kping, I had never looked at it, but I was like, okay, we're making CMP. Why don't we loosely agree on a YAML and then like run out and try to implement it and then use it for a little bit and say, okay, this doesn't work at all. We need to iterate further on the API, right? Rather than like spend a year on the API, implement.
Yeah.
Right.
If you look at the gateway API thing, it's like been developed like from 2 years to right now, and they are in V1 Alpha 1, but they are changing. And this is the idea of being in alpha, right? Because you might like be, hey, we developed something that doesn't apply. So I think that sometimes we should like I'm gonna have some regrets about that if someone watches this, but sometimes you need to ask less and do more.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that we maybe one thing that Jay actually is right is that we got traction because we decided, hey, we are gonna do this way, and if this applies to Kubernetes, okay, otherwise okay as well. And this is how Kping is going, right? So we can see like Mikhail conducts in his way, and they are doing some experiments, and then they got traction for Windows side. So I think we should probably do the same. So if Abhishek and the others, they have an agreement about how they imagine how cluster network policy is gonna be, like, okay, it fits like 75%, 80% of what we want. Personally, I can see a reason why we shouldn't start like developing something that you can add those policies and they can be calculated on the other side to something that becomes into firewall rules the same way as per told or whatever, right? But at least we are gonna have some fun, and we are gonna have something fun actually to people to take a look. After all, like gateway API is still an API, and we have each ingress controller needing to implement their own way to do that. I would be really happy for as an ingress implementator, for example, if I have a controller that generates ingresses from the gateway API, for example, right? So yeah, this one. But they've been developing these like since 2019, I guess.
Right. I think it's an interesting, it is still two separate things, right? The API discussion with CMP and this, but the concept of boiling down like any policy, CMP, NP, NPv2 to like a single set of rules that can be understood by CNI is kind of interesting, and can be implemented across various things. I don't know. We're kind of just bike shedding here, but
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think there are like other things also we should try to target. Like for example, the status is something which is like a low hanging fruit, right?
Right.
And but the problem is that we need someone to drive it forward, and I think we are missing that.
Yep.
And if someone on the call here or someone who's watches this video later on can take it, and because I remember there was someone who was interested in solving that for network policies.
It was Tom from Red Hat, but he moved teams and I don't.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. So that's the part where we have to make do with attrition in this community as well.
Right.
So if there's someone who can, there was also another cool idea about service account selectors in the network policies. There's also the service, like using services within Kubernetes network policy. So those are things that I think, if we just take them and move forward, I think there will be some fun for people to discuss on this call as well. And I think those are some implementable caps. Once we fix some of those nitty-gritties of those caps. So those are a few things that, if we get few people who want to drive them, I think it will be fun.
Yeah.
But I agree on the what Ricardo mentioned, that sometimes we just need to start doing things, and we are hoping that we can get to that stage with CNP soon. I think that's what Andrew wanted to get a bit like also discuss a bit about that, right? Later on, right?
Right. No.
Satish was dealing with the service account thing, not? Satish
I
is
think
here.
it was Vinay.
Yes. Yes, Ricardo. Yeah. Yeah. Vinay, like I'm part of Vinay's team as well. So yeah, we are actually trying to work on service selectors, but it was actually put on hold because we were actually discussing about network policy v2 and how it's going to affect, how it's going to influence, or maybe
I remember now the fail open and the fail close problem, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So that's the reason we try to.
It's like the versioning. It's like the versioning problem almost within network policy.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I mean, I think I haven't dove in enough, but I think there's a pretty easy solution to that if we just decide if we're going to fail open or fail closed and move on down the road, right? But it just takes someone to sit down and start writing the cap, unfortunately, and I don't have time to do that. And that's what it boils down to, is like more involvement, more people who are excited. I mean, Kubernetes networking security is like such a hot space, and I think there's a lot of excitement around it, but in this working group specifically, like Ricardo said, like things move really slow. So I think thinking about how we can like sandbox and create maybe a tool to sandbox or something fun, it could gain traction pretty fast and get a lot of people here, right? And get more done.
Yeah. The thing is that when we've been designing the port range thing, Tim Hawkins said something that we should be aware of, which is we are not dealing actually with something that cannot, that we are dealing with something that deals with the cluster security, right, and the workload security. And in that sense, if we do something wrong, we might have end with some CVE or something like that. And I guess this is why people are really careful about what we do with network policy. I agree with this approach. So, but I also agree when then Winship says that maybe we have nothing else to do with network policy v1 other than start designing the network policy v2, right? Yeah. But we can't keep waiting for like everybody to say if this is good or this is not good. So I think that we should just say, hey, okay, let's start maybe when Abhishek and the other folks they end designing the cluster network policy, we can get some lessons from the cluster network policy to network policy v2, and say, hey, okay, so this is going to be the CRD for network policy v2, and we are going to have some controller here that's going to do all of the rules calculations, and if CNIs want to rely on that, you just need to get this data structure and then apply the policy as is the way that you want in your, right? So
I think Nadeem and Prasad are kind of like looking into the V2 as we speak. So, so maybe we should also see whether is there anything that we can help on that, and or perhaps if they have like further iterations, or what do they feel about the V2?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, Abhishek. Yeah, I think when we were just doing the side chat with Nadeem on when you guys are talking. So I don't know the reason we slowed down on the V2 is like we wanted to see how CNP is evolving, because some of the problems are common. So hence we slow down there. But I think I agree with the Ricardo point, like we can just start plowing with V2 and see where does it go. Maybe we implement something which is half baked, still it's okay, but at least we are making some progress, right?
Let's do this.
Right. So
Yeah.
so I mean there could be disagreements on between the way we were proposing, because some of the things are a little controversial, right? Like we are trying to say endpoint 1, endpoint 2, whereas we are talking egress and egress. But we can just huddle around and say, hey, fine, we let's say we just go after start implementing, because if you look into other existing policies, right, either Calico or Cilium or even Juniper, they are doing endpoint endpoint related things. So that means it has enough momentum there. So it's just that we agree upon and we start coding it.
Maybe what we can do is we can follow what we've done a bit on CNP is, the good thing about network policy V2 is that the use cases are already here, because network policy has been present for many years. So maybe we take those use cases and we just now define or implement those use cases with YAMLs that your proposal kind of solves. And then we can see why this is an improvement over network policy V1, and how these solve and how simple it is to use V2, and how extensible it can be with V2. I think that would be a good start. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you. I think maybe we'll start with that. So
And this is
maybe-
already a start on that kind of your doc you already started working on.
Sorry, Andrew, I missed it. Can you repeat that?
Your document network policy V2 motivations is already kind of a good start, a good place to keep putting ideas down. And
True. So we can Abhishek, maybe on this right after this call or sometime we can get the YAML files, because I was missing a couple of last meetings. I was on PTO. So we can take some of the YAML files which you are creating and we'll convert into V2's way. And then we can start compare and contrast as you're proposing. So then we can kickstart on that. Then we can see how do we implement that once we agree upon. Does that seems to be fair?
Yeah, and I think this last week or so we are also learning, right, in the process, because we have also evolved the network policy, CNP, API, and the way we present it in so many ways over the last few months. And so I think on Friday and today, Andrew and I did some changes, tweaks to the way we want to showcase our API design. And I think a couple of things that we did, I feel is an improvement. Maybe I'm wrong, but one of the things that we did was we tabulated the differences between the three approaches that we have. Then we have YAMLs based on each use cases, And then Andrew has done like, these nice use case diagrams for every use case. And I feel that it's much more clearer now. And I think once we go through that, maybe if everyone feels that this is much more clearer way to express our intentions, then I guess you can follow the same suit, and that will help. You can do a tabular form between the V1 versus V2, how V2 is better, and those kind of things.
Okay, we can start on that, Abhishek. So Nadeem, do you have any comment?
No, yeah, just one comment. The main thing why we took a break or took a pause here, right? Out of two major changes in V2, one is related to how the end-to-end policy works, and other is the priority model. Priority model was in a complete overlap with CNP, and since we were discussing priority model in CNP for last 4 weeks, right? I think unless that is closed, right? Because we don't want to propose something in CNP and something different in V2 because it is going back to back, right? So that is why we took a pause.
Yeah, and I mean, not to say anything, wrong with what we are doing. So, but we have, almost, I don't know, like 10, 20 plus years of experience combined, right, in firewalling area, and we are not able to close things, pretty quickly. Is a little surprising to me. I mean, I don't know, maybe because of too much of legacy we have in our head. But I was a little surprised, like, the way things are going pretty slow,
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
Yeah,
I mean,
I also agree. But at
yeah,
the end of the day,
if
we are
you see,
also
like, Nadeem has, more than, I don't know, 6, 7, or maybe close to 10 years of experience in firewalling. I have similar, and, I'm pretty sure Andrew and, Ricardo has, that level. If you see, like, it's almost 25, 30, or even 40 years of, good experience in this area. We were not able to shake it off. Means like a little surprising.
So, I mean, I think personally, like, something that'll help for the next one is having like more concrete deadlines, and if there is disagreements with what's being put forward, like we have to have deadlines for posting responses to disagreements, right? We've kind of been going in circles in a lot of ways, and so it's given me some ideas. Like, I think moving forward, especially with the Network Policy API repo, how we can document how this process should work when looking at how it hasn't worked with CMP, and that we have a somewhat rigid framework for API development within the SIG Network Policy API subgroup, and it'll make it easier. So.
Got it. Okay, so I think Nadeem and myself will, start circling with Abhishek and, Ricardo and others, so that, like, we will try to put V1 versus V2, on the same spreadsheet, or like, side by side, and see, whether we are making some improvements, if so, how, and what are the additional things we are solving, in V2, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah,
Cool.
I'm okay with that.
Cool, thanks.
Okay, so
Yeah.
last 20 minutes, we can look at what Abhishek was talking about, I guess, with CMP. So here's the current status with CMP. We are still kind of stuck, I would say, on implementation. And so far, we've boiled it down to 3 major categories of implementation. This is a good pros versus cons of all 3. Abhishek, do you think we should run through this, or should we run through kind of what we've updated on the PowerPoint?
Yeah, I think the PowerPoint would be a good idea because that's more visual. And
yeah. So this is where we're kind of stuck. We as a group agreed generically, I want to say, I think everyone agreed. I hope everyone agreed. If they didn't agree, we've commented on this already, hopefully, on these use cases for CMP. Or we know they're not exhaustive, but they seem to be the most common use cases. And that's kind of our base point, right? In the future, these use cases should be approved before we even move on to API design. and they would be approved in the SIG network policy API repo, and everything would flow from there, right? The use cases are the root of truth for any API. They should be, and the personas. So I think that's what we've done so far. And now we are basically locked in on the two different types of solutions, i.e. implementations. So 3 actions versus priority ordering. And so what we've done so far is we took a first stab at making sample YAMLs for each option for each use case. So that is the part that's not done. But what is done is clarification of these use cases. So as you can see here, now we walk through every use case. They're actually indexed on this slide. We walk through the use case explicitly, and then we also have an explicit diagram for each use case. So first one is isolate pods carrying sensitive data from namespace, name, sensitive namespace from all other namespaces. This is basically a strong deny use case, right? The cluster admin wants to be able to fully block pods in a sensitive namespace from everything else. That's a pretty straightforward use case. What we've done now, though, is add diagrams here to adequately represent it. And then what we want to do is have YAMLs right after those diagrams that match what's going on. So like, how do we implement this for priority ordering based YAML versus 3 action based YAML? Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes,
Yeah,
it
one
does.
of
For me, it does.
yeah one of the things that I missed a couple of meetings in the last few weeks, and so I did not know, I don't know whether we all agree upon those use cases or not. And that's why I think this visual representation kind of helps at least help clarify what we really mean by this use case. So at least I feel it's clearer. But other guys on the call, if you think that this is something still not well understood, and we should correct that, because in the end, I mean, if we have difference of understanding about a particular use case, then our YAMLs are not going to make sense.
Right. And I think the greatest confusion in terms of use cases was still around 4, right? Prasad and Nadeem, which is the delegate functionality.
Yeah, the 4A was.
So I tried to boil this down to somewhat simpler of a representation. So 4A is strictly deny inter namespace traffic, but delegate public service to be maintained by network policy, or allowed or denied via network policy. So a couple things to highlight here is you can see we have 2 tenants, one foo, one bar, and they are surrounded by an overridable deny, right? So by default, these 2 tenants cannot talk to each other, which is shown here and by the purple border. But there's also a empower action, which allows tenant foo to talk to service public, which is in tenant bar. So all that empower action does, these yellow lines, is say, okay, we're not explicitly allowing tenant foo to talk to service public, but we're saying the tenant foo namespace can apply network policies that either allow or deny that service. Does that make sense, or does this help at all?
Yeah, it does. But I think this is probably one of the most complex use case. The reason is not that it's difficult to understand. When we translate it to YAML, right, then we have to see whether what we call delegate is actually a delegate or just a exclusion from the match rule. Because if you see how Sanjeev presented one of the YAMLs for this, he actually excluded.
So that's a big, that's like kind of the decision we have to make. What do we think is easier to understand? So Sanjeev attacks this as, he's not here, he's not able to be here today, but he attacks this as a delegation is let's not match on it, versus Abhishek and Yang kind of match on it as we want to explicitly say that we want to delegate traffic to service pub. And our role as a group is to say, what is easier? What is simpler? What makes more sense, right?
Yes, I think that will be the one of the major discussion. Other than this particular point, I think most of them, at least we have done a lot of discussion in the group. So the use case and the corresponding YAMLs are pretty clear.
So Nadeem and all, I missed this one, but is this the one after the network policy evaluation, this would get evaluated? Is that the one?
If you think from the Sanjeev's proposal or the way we have put in V2, yes. But if you want to explicitly code delegate in the YAML, then there is an alternate proposal, I think, from Abhishek, I think, right?
So I mean, not to bring a different, different angle to this. Typically, what we have seen is like, pre and post. That is, that is used by customers, right? So where, we say the post is what are the things to be done. It's clear that like, in the YAML, you can specify, hey, this is what I'm doing post. So would that help?
The pre and post are part of the discussion. Yes, I mean in V2 we have put it like pre and post, but even in the current proposal, right? If you think these precedence option or the bucket option, right? This will be like something which is delegated, right? Will come in after the network policy is evaluated.
Yeah. So basically, these yellow lines mean that the traffic to service pub will be allowed or denied by a network policy, a normal network policy, right? It'll fall through this CNP border that we've put around the tenant.
Yeah, I think we should have Sanjeev for the discussion, but I mean, if I have to put my view, I like the Sanjeev's proposal because typically in the firewall, we don't code for the delegate. We let people add that rule upfront or before the broader rule if they want to add any exception, which in this case is delegate.
So when you say you let the user put it up front, they explicitly say in the rule though, right, that we want to allow traffic from service pub. Is that what you're saying?
No, I mean, if I have to implement in a typical firewall, right, I can just say the denied traffic without any mention of public service, but somebody can put a rule just above this or anywhere above this rule saying that tenant who can access service pub.
So that's an explicit allow though, right?
Yeah, that's an explicit allow, but it even though the same traffic is matched by these two rules, the one broader rule which says nobody can talk to tenant bar, right?
So your explicit allow is to be done by a cluster administrator and not by a namespace owner, correct?
No, I mean, I don't want to bring in V2 proposal here, but in V2, what we have done is for anything which we want tenant to override, we have put in a bucket in the cluster level, but a bucket which is evaluated after the cluster, after the namespace policies or the normal KNPs.
So basically it's like this, right? You have a global policy and you have a tenant policy. You have the again the post tenant policy, which is controlled by the global. So that's where like pre and post for the tenant.
Yes, so even in this case, if we go for the priority bucket based prioritizing, right? Anything deny with delegate is evaluated after the network after the namespace policies, right?
Exactly. No, I agree. I'm just trying to clarify the name terms.
No, so you still need to, when you're creating a deny using cluster network policies, you need to write the deny such that you have those holes for your service pub, right? You have to poke holes.
Yes, that is true. But we are, instead of poking holes, if we evaluate that the broader policy after the namespace policy, right? That gives namespace administrators an option to override those policies. Something which I want to strictly deny with no override, that is the use case
So-
1A and right, that will be
So if
above
you look at
the
the
ANP.
so if you look at the diagram, what we want to do is that the tenant foo namespaces should not be able to talk to tenant bar namespaces, like other workloads. Service pub is just one service within the bar namespace, but the other workloads should not be able to talk to each other. And that's a strict no. That's a higher level, cluster level policy. So in your proposal, it will be of the cluster admin bucket, right? The ping,
Yes.
right? But now you need to carve out a hole out of that to be able to do the service pub traffic so that you can delegate that to using the lower priority, lower bucket rules. Is that correct? Otherwise,
Yes.
your pink box is going to override everything, and you're never going to be
Correct.
able to poke it out. So that's the hole that I'm talking about. You need to carve out a hole out of that pink box for those yellow lines. Correct?
Right. So so that's the discussion point, right? The two discussion point, like one in the Sanjay's proposal, right? He's not coding the holes. He's just saying, okay, I'll exclude these things.
Correct. The exclusion. Yes.
Other option is you code the holes and let the network administrator, the namespace admins to do something with the hole, right? Whether to allow or deny. Now this
Correct.
coding the hole, that is something very new in my opinion, right? We don't typically code for the holes. Like this delegate mechanism is very, we can exclude something or we can put something lower priority so that somebody wants to have an above
So
it.
the thing is that we don't have like separate grouping constructs. We are not like putting IP addresses in here that it's easier to exclude certain IP addresses from that list or that group. We are using label selectors, and label selectors it's harder to, or not, it's not harder. It just becomes like a complex mechanism, and that's why we have to work towards that proposal. And that's the only thing. I mean, otherwise, if you're thinking IP blocks, we're thinking CIDRs, we can always carve out these things, and it's easier when you're doing it directly on the SDN or other places.
Right. So yeah, so I understand that exclude may not be able to solve all the problem because even the exclusion is specifically on the both source and the other side, right? Unless you do it, it's very complex to do really, right? Because if you put A, then A, I mean, if you put on one side, then it does not really capture what hole you want to actually allow, right? But I was saying that if we can relax this, right? The main point in my mind is, do we need to really tell user that there is a hole and only you can allow that hole? I understand I'm maybe changing the use case, but do we have to have the use case where the cluster network admin only allows the network namespace admin to make a decision only in that particular hole? Or we can give a little broader that I will put from a cluster network policy, I have a recommended denies, but I'll make it open for you to decide if you want to do something different in your namespace.
Yeah, that but is the hard part to codify.
Yeah.
So with policy,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that you mentioned that you won't be able to. You can solve it using priority based. It's just that the YAML looks complex. And that's the only thing. And in the end, we want to make sure that the things that we are able to write as administrators is simple and it solves all use cases. Sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, and the question I think is boiled down to: do you write these pink boxes and explicitly write them so that there's two little gaps in them, or do you write these pink boxes and then write these yellow lines? Like, I'm trying to really dumb it down, and you can see that explicitly here, right? This is priority ordering. This is explicitly writing those pink boxes. It's saying we're going to isolate that tenant, which is tenant bar, and we're going to isolate it except for the pods that are backing the public service, right? Now, in my opinion, I agree that this is probably what's more traditionally done in firewalling. But I think writing the pink box with holes in it is more confusing than explicitly just writing the pink box, which is basically the strict deny chapter all and other namespaces is right here. It's a deny action. and then writing the empower rule to explicitly, write those yellow lines. And that's just my opinion in terms of readability. That's kind of where I'm at on it. I don't know though. I mean, that it is a tricky thing, but I think that's where it boils down to is do you write the yellow lines or do you write the pink boxes with the holes already in it? Writing that with a YAML is a little bit more complicated. And we could also say like, this isn't a valid use case, but I think generally from our discussions around CMP, this is one of the hardest use cases to implement, but also something that's kind of important for the overlap of network policy and CMP.
Yeah, so I understand this is not a, I mean, I can definitely not say this is not a valid use case, but if we take out a little bit of strictness from this place, right, then it becomes much easier to do. And I don't know, I think that is more acceptable. That will be acceptable and definitely very easy to manage. But if this particular use case, that clustered network policy will only give network policy admin a whole to manage, that is going to complicate the thing, because that kind of things are not done today in any like in the network policy or in the legacy firewalls.
I mean, it's not just the whole for the service public or public services and other things, or namespaces like monitoring or other namespaces, system namespaces, but it's also intra namespace traffic. You may not want your intra namespace traffic to be always allowed. So for example, though, within that foo NS1 and foo NS2, you may not always want that to be explicitly allowed. So that should also be delegated. And that's a very common use case. So it's a combination of these things.
Yes,
I think
no, I understand the combination. The thing is whether we can, like if the cluster network policy, the administrator level, they can put this broader rule, and if they trust that the network, the namespace admins will only override, because it's the whole they are opening on their namespace, right? Only what they are intentionally opening from the cluster network policy level, right? If we have the trust, then it is much simpler to just put it in a priority. But if we don't trust them and we want to explicitly only give them option of opening that hole, that means at the cluster network policy, we have to tell what hole. That makes it a little more complicated. So in typical, like in more of the legacy firewall models, right, what we do is we have a network level policies, which is before the device level policies and after the device level policy. But we trust the device level administrator. If they're putting anything there, they know exactly what they're doing. They can definitely not override something which is before, but they can override something which is after. Now, by overriding something which is after, if they make a complete blunder, then yeah, they can do it. That's the part I think which delegate tries to solve. But I mean that's the decision whether we can give this kind of control to the namespace admins or not.
I think we both are trying to solve the delegate use case, right? It's just how it's being solved.
Yes.
Right. In one case, we are explicitly providing that action. In the other case, you are carving out things because you're then not writing a more restrictive deny. You're actually writing a deny which is composite of a lot of rules.
Yes.
Just so that you can have those holes already present. So.
How about if you go iterative, right? In the sense, initially, you carve out in such a way that, like, whatever is needed in the in the cluster level. And if we are finding it hard, then, we can introduce the, whole mechanism. But if you do the other way, then, you don't have the opportunity. Basically, now you can iterate, whether the really providing the whole is required or not.
That doesn't scale, that doesn't solve. I mean, so for example, the reason why we are thinking of V2 is because we are not able to iterate on V1 once we have certain things. So like then the question of fail open versus fail close come in, and so we need to think carefully when we are trying to do something like that in that sense.
No, I don't mean like, the CNP will be closed, but at least like, we make progress. Then, during this course, right, we realize that, okay, fine, we do see a need to create a, whole mechanism. I mean, then, we start introducing that. See, otherwise, I mean, we know this is the, we are agreeing on the problem. We are not agreeing on this, how we are providing the solution, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So does this change any aspect, once you go on the other way of doing things, where with give the priority orders or the rule numbers and stuff like that?
What do you mean? So you mean if we were to just do priority ordering at first and then have to add like some sort of extra action? It's like in priority ordering now. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm wondering, does this discussion change with the priority order?
Certain pieces, right? I think both solutions can implement every use case, right? Priority ordering can lead to some YAML explosion. 3-action can lead to some YAML explosion. One of the major things with priority ordering is something to remember that I've always found interesting in this discussion is like Abhishek and Yang both have implemented priority ordering for Antria, right? And one of their main things from a CNI point of view, which is another good point of view, is like they find it really hard to implement because you can have an unlimited quote unquote sandwiching of priority rules. So say you have a policy at priority 10 with 10 rules, and then you have another priority and rules are only ordered based on the order in the ingress to egress sections. Like there's an unlimited number of priorities that can go on there because priorities are floats. Am I saying that right, Abhishek?
Yeah, so you need to carefully think in terms of how you do the priorities, because if you don't have enough spacing between each of those priorities, then you need to be able to update those priorities on the fly, which essentially puts the load on the CNI, which is actually implementing those, and then reorder those rules and insert in between. It's also, the other thing is that, it's visually very hard to figure out that by just looking at YAMLs and, we have dashboard, you're able to see things clearly. And that's the thing that you won't get as part of your upstream experience. Like, you just have YAMLs. You need now another way to visualize your policy or your overall hierarchy of rules. And those are a few things which are kind of like challenges. It's not something to say that it's not something that we cannot solve. It's just that, or at least, you need a dashboard to figure out the whole hierarchy of your security rules and how the flow happens. But those are the things those are the pros and cons that we have to weigh.
I see.
I think
how do you solve? How do you solve?
If I understood, Prasad, are you saying? I know we are anyway have a lot of deep dives into priority versus bucket options, right? So if I understood you correctly, you are saying that how this particular use case affects between these two options, or are you saying that can we have the options finalized first and then come back to this?
Yeah, actually, maybe initially I thought the first point was I was trying to go after first point. If it is common for both priority versus bucketization, then fine, we can discuss. If once we choose one versus the other, if the other diminishes, then then the discussion is moot, right? So now going back to the priority ordering, right? I still find it pretty hard. How do we do priority ordering? If you have a pod selectors, you can select in a number of ways. Let's say you take an example of I'm trying to select a pod with the application equal to HR app, and another pod selected is application equal to HR app, and site equal to Sunnyvale, and or you can have a few other ways of doing the pod selections.
Right.
How do you put the ordering among these network policies?
That's interesting. Yeah.
So you have no clue how this will get formed, right? So that's where one approach we did was you can do only one way selection, which is application weight. You can select only the application. That's the only anchor point. Then inside the application, you have a ordered set of policies. Inside each policy, you have an ordered set of rules. So that's how, we, at least we address the problem. But I'm trying to understand, it's like, if you have a different ways of doing pod selections, it's pretty hard to do the ordering of, things among the policies. I don't know whether I'm able to put my,
No, I
That's a good
understand
point.
what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why our legacy way of writing things do not really map directly well. Or I mean, they can. It's just that we need to be, we need to adapt to the Kubernetes way of things. And since the label selector is the main way of writing this grouping, it becomes harder to use the priority ordering. But we are way over time. I have another
Yeah,
meeting to
sorry.
jump to.
Sorry, I was letting it run because I think that was some really good conversation. To get to a conclusion on this though, Prasad and Nadeem, I think it's good that y'all are kind of on the other side with Sanjeev a little bit on this priority ordering thing. Do you think, finishing this PowerPoint truly, so making sure that every sample YAML we have is in line with the diagrams we've written, do you think that would help us, take that next step?
yes, Andrew.
Okay. So that's going to be my goal for this next week, trying to foster that moving along, because I would like to finish this up. Like you said, we've been talking about this for a long time. And some of those problems are going to come out as we write these YAMLs and look at them, because right now the YAML samples are not correct. We're correct up to the diagram, but these are wrong in some places. So if we can work together to get that done before next week, I think that'd be really awesome.
I would also suggest you, Andrew, Abhishek, if you want to jump in, I don't want to be the responsible for you getting late. So the other thing that I want to suggest you, Andrew, is maybe we should add or change this meeting to be something like, okay, this is going to be now just network policy v2 or just cluster network policy, and we are going to move forward and faster to this stuff to start having proper fun.
Right.
So
that's kind of what I've been trying to get. I brought this back to CMP mainly because I feel like we as a team need to get this done, right?
Yeah.
Or moving
forward.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to come back also, at least to watch my agenda and not be warded.
Yeah, but the goal is to get this PowerPoint done and then bring it to Signet and, really try to get it nailed down, because I think now we almost have enough description. Like someone can not know anything about the last year of discussion and look at this PowerPoint and say, okay, this makes sense, or this does not make sense, right? To each YAML and each use case.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Okay. Thank you everyone for coming. Yeah. Really great conversation today. Let's keep working on this. And yeah, Prasad and Nadeem, if you have any more comments on this, please comment away on it before next week and we'll get it ironed out.
See you folks.
Okay. Bye everyone.
Bye.